The sun was punishing that Saturday. The kind of bright, relentless afternoon that leaves nowhere to hide. Not behind a tree, not behind a curtain, not behind a smile. On Carmichael Drive, the sprinklers had stopped running an hour ago. Children had retreated indoors. The only things moving were the heat rising off the asphalt, a few lazy flies circling a neighbor's recycling bin, and Raymond Osei, who stood in his own driveway like a man who had rehearsed his cruelty and decided the whole street deserved a front-row seat. Behind him, parked at a diagonal that blocked the walkway, sat his charcoal gray Range Rover. The passenger window was down. Sitting inside with one elbow propped on the door and her gold-tipped nails catching the light was Zara Mensah. She wasn't pretending not to watch. She was watching with the full, deliberate attention of a woman who had waited a long time for this afternoon and intended to enjoy every second of it. At the foot of the driveway, pressed against the city trash bin like they had been placed there by someone who wanted to make a point, sat 2 suitcases and 4 black garbage bags. Everything that belonged to Ada Eze Osei. 7 years of a life, compressed into luggage that nobody had bothered to zip closed properly. Raymond walked to the edge of the pile. He pointed first at the bags, then at his wife. "That's where you belong," he said. His voice was steady, practiced, loud enough to reach both ends of the street. "Right there, next to the trash. Take your things and don't come back to my house." Zara laughed from the car. It was not a nervous laugh. It was a performance, full-throated, deliberate, designed to travel. And it did. Every door on Carmichael Drive that had been half open went fully still. Mrs. Ibarra on the porch dropped her broom. The Nanaji sisters, who were skipping rope at the edge of their yard, stopped mid-jump and stared. Old Mr. Tago set down his newspaper and didn't pick it back up. One by one the faces appeared, behind glass, between curtains, from behind garden fences. Carmichael Drive was watching, and not one of them said a word. Adaeze stood where she had been standing since Raymond dragged the last bag to the curb, both hands loose at her sides, her back straight, her chin level. She looked at Raymond, then she looked at Zara, then she looked at the suitcases at her feet. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she didn't reach for her bags like a woman scrambling to hold on to something that was already gone. She stood the way a woman stands when she has already finished grieving something, not because she doesn't feel it, but because feeling it is no longer the most important thing she has to do. Every person watching that sidewalk believed they were seeing a woman hit the lowest point of her life. Not a single soul realized they were watching the exact moment her husband destroyed his own.
Raymond was waiting for something. He had planned for something, a scene. Tears, a raised voice, maybe a thrown shoe, something he could point to later and say, "See, that's exactly why I had to do this. That's exactly what she was." But Adaeze gave him nothing. She bent down slowly, reached past the garbage bags, and pulled something from the edge of the pile, a leather journal. Old, soft-cornered, the spine cracked from years of being opened and closed with care. Her mother-in-law must have thought it was worth nothing. She had dropped it on the heap without a second look. Adaeze dusted the cover with the flat of her palm. She tucked it under her arm. She adjusted her collar and let the silence stretch across the full length of the street. Raymond shifted his weight. He hadn't expected quiet, and somehow her quiet was the loudest thing that had ever stood in that driveway. At the far end of Carmichael Drive, something caught the light. A car turned the corner, black, low and long, moving at the steady, unhurried pace of something that has never once needed to rush. The engine was barely a sound, more like a presence than a noise, the kind of vehicle that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't have to. Every head on the block turned. Raymond looked at it. Then he looked at Adaeze. Her smile hadn't changed. It was still there, small, patient, directed at no one, like a woman who had been expecting something for a very long time and was simply relieved it had finally arrived. But before that Rolls Royce comes to a stop in front of this house, before the door opens and everything on Carmichael Drive shifts forever, you need to understand exactly why Adaeze was standing next to trash in the first place. Cut back 7 years earlier. 7 years before that Saturday, Raymond Osei walked into a hair salon on Dakota Avenue looking for a car parts shop that turned out to be a block further east. He never found the shop, but he found Adaeze. She was in the second chair from the door, reading a book between appointments, a small dog-eared novel with a cracked spine, holding a wide-tooth comb loosely in her other hand, like she'd forgotten it was there. When she looked up, she didn't smile immediately. She just looked, the kind of easy, unbothered look that doesn't try to perform anything. That was the thing that made him stay. He asked for directions. She gave them. He stood in the doorway for 3 extra minutes asking questions he already knew the answers to. When he finally left, he walked past the car parts shop entirely because he was thinking about the way she tilted her head when she read. They dated for 14 months. By the end of the first 3, he had stopped pretending he was anything except completely undone by her steadiness, her warmth, the way a room softened when she entered it. Back then, what Raymond loved most about Adaeze was the peace that came with her, the kind you can't manufacture, the kind that means something is solid all the way through. He just didn't understand yet that peaceful women are often carrying the deepest roots. 6:30 to 9:30. Adaeze built him. The year before they married, Raymond's logistics company was 3 months away from collapse. He had 2 unpaid invoices, 1 overdrawn account, and a pride that made it nearly impossible to tell anyone how bad things actually were. Adaeze found out anyway, not because he told her, because she paid attention. She sold the gold earrings her mother had given her, not because he asked, because she didn't want him to have to. She covered 2 months of his business insurance without mentioning it. She stayed up past midnight going through his accounts with him on nights he couldn't focus. She packed his lunch every morning, not because it was her job, because she knew he skipped meals when he was stressed, and she refused to let him carry that alone. When 2 of his drivers walked off the same week, she sat with him through the kind of silence that falls on a man when he doesn't know if everything he's built is going to make it. She didn't marry a successful man. She helped build one. And she did it quietly, without a receipt, without a scoreboard, because she believed in him the way you only genuinely believe in someone you love. That man, the man who sat at her kitchen table at midnight eating the food she made and telling her about his fear, that was the Raymond she married. The one who would one day point at her from his own driveway and call her trash, that man was a stranger wearing his face. 9:30 to 11:30. The wedding and journal setup. They married on a Saturday in October on the grounds of grandmother Nkechi Morrow's property, a quiet, wide estate past the edge of the city, down a gravel road lined with old mango trees that had been there longer than anyone could remember. Nkechi Morrow stood at the front of the aisle that afternoon and watched her granddaughter walk toward the man she had chosen. She didn't speak during the ceremony. She watched. And when the vows were done, before anyone had moved toward the reception tables, she pressed something into Adaeze's hands. A leather journal. Old, oiled, the cover smooth from decades of handling, the spine cracked in 3 places from being opened and closed with care. Her mother-in-law must have thought it was worth nothing. She had dropped it on the heap without a second look. Adaeze dusted the cover with the flat of her palm. She tucked it under her arm, she adjusted her collar, and let the silence stretch across the full length of the street. Nkechi Morrow didn't give things without reasons, and whatever was buried in that journal had been waiting there long before Adaeze even knew she would need it.
The first 3 years on Carmichael Drive were good, genuinely good.
Raymond brought coffee to her before she opened her eyes. He left notes on the bathroom mirror on days he left early. He came home for dinner even when it wasn't convenient. They tried for a child once. It didn't happen the way they hoped. That grief sat between them for a season, quiet and heavy, but they carried it together, and it didn't break what they were building. Adese believed, with the full, unguarded belief of a woman who had seen what love looks like when it's consistent, that what they had was worth protecting. Give a story tenderness before you give it betrayal, because the deeper the love, the more devastating the fall, and the more devastating the fall, the longer people stay to watch someone rise. Then, Raymond got the promotion. Regional Operations Director. New title, new salary, new everything. Company car in the driveway, tailored suits he started buying without telling her, a phone he kept face down on every surface, as if somehow gravity had shifted for that one specific device. It didn't happen in a day, it crept. First, it was the late nights, explainable, understandable, the cost of a bigger role. Then it was the irritation that came home with him, the short answers to questions she had always been allowed to ask. Then it was the way he started correcting her in company. Not dramatically, just small corrections, the kind designed to remind a room that he had outgrown something. And the something he was pointing at, without ever saying her name, was her. It wasn't the lies that changed first, it was the respect. And when respect leaves a marriage, everything else starts packing its bags. Pauline Osai had opinions she'd been storing for years, waiting for the right season to release them. Now that Raymond had status, she decided the season had arrived. She started slowly, a comment over Sunday dinner, softly delivered, easily denied. A man climbing at this rate needs a partner who can hold her own in a certain kind of room. She'd pause, set down her fork, let the sentence breathe. A salon woman is a lovely thing, Adese, but there is a ceiling to where that takes a family. She never said it plainly. She didn't have to. The meaning arrived regardless. What made it worse was that Raymond didn't push back. He sat at that table and nodded at his mother's words like they were weather reports, accurate observations about a situation that was simply what it was. The first time Adese watched him do it, something shifted behind her eyes. Not anger, recognition. The quiet, awful recognition that the man she had stayed up with at midnight, whose debts she had helped carry, that man had decided she was no longer worth defending in front of his mother. That silence was its own kind of answer. Adese did not meet Zara Mensah for a long time. She only met the evidence. A scent she hadn't bought, something warm, sweet, expensive, that met her at the front door when Raymond came home late. A receipt from a restaurant she had never been to folded inside his jacket pocket. A voice on the speaker during a car ride that went quiet the moment Adese walked into the garage. A glass in the kitchen with a lipstick mark she recognized as belonging to no shade she owned. She didn't let herself arrive at the conclusion right away. She held the evidence like puzzle pieces and waited until the picture was too clear to deny. When it was, she didn't cry. She filed it. Behind her eyes, in that quiet place where certainty lives before it decides what to do. Adese had the kind of stillness that only comes when a woman has stopped being confused and started being certain. She wasn't falling apart, she was thinking, measuring, turning every detail over in her hands, the way you do when you're building something and you need to know what you're working with before you begin. She opened the journal more often now, not to write, to read the back pages,
the ones she had always left alone because her grandmother told her the time would come. Something was on those pages, something with numbers she didn't fully understand yet, legal language, a notary stamp, her own name printed in ink that was older than her marriage. And every night she looked at those pages, the feeling grew stronger that what was buried inside that journal was not a memory, it was a weapon, and it had been sharpening for years without her knowing.
The truth found Adeze on an ordinary Thursday. Raymond was in the shower. The house smelled like the dinner she had made and left covered on the stove. Outside, it was raining lightly, the kind of rain that makes every sound indoors feel more contained, more private, more final. His second phone sat on the bathroom counter with the screen still open. She hadn't planned to look. She walked in to retrieve her face cream from the top shelf. The screen was right there. A thread of messages, uninterrupted, months of them. Zara's name at the top. "When am I actually moving in, baby? I'm tired of waiting." Raymond's reply beneath it. "2 more weeks. My mom is already handling the paperwork side. She'll leave quiet. She doesn't have the connections to make any noise." Adeze's fingers tightened on the face cream until her knuckles went pale. She scrolled. Then she found the group thread. 3 names: Raymond, Zara, Pauline. 217 messages. Pauline had written, "She came into this marriage with nothing except that old grandmother's name, no real family money, no standing, no leverage. She'll walk out the way she walked in, quietly and without making trouble." Zara had sent 3 laughing emojis. Raymond had written 1 word, "exactly." The water in the shower shut off. Adeze placed the phone back on the counter, same angle, same direction, screen still glowing. She walked out of the bathroom without a sound. She sat on the edge of the bed. She placed both hands flat on her knees and breathed. In, out, steady. She did not scream. She did not cry. She did not throw a single thing. She opened the journal. She turned to the back pages. This time she read slowly, carefully, word by word. A trust reference number, a legal description of a land parcel, a deed transfer with a date that preceded her birth, a notary stamp, a certified letter from a family attorney, and her name, Adeze Amara Morrow, her full maiden name, printed in 3 separate places across 3 separate documents that had been folded and pressed inside the back cover of the journal. She didn't understand everything she was reading, but she understood enough. She understood that this was not an old woman's keepsake. This was a legal instrument, and it had been sitting on her nightstand for 7 years while her husband made plans for her removal. She sat with those pages open on her lap until the room turned gray with early morning light. Then she picked up her phone. She called the one person in her life she had never once doubted. "Grandma," she said. Her voice was even, calm. "I need you to tell me what's in the back of this journal. All of it. Now."
She drove 40 minutes outside the city on a Saturday morning, past the last shopping complex, past the petrol stations and the roadside churches, out into the wide green quiet where the land changed and the air felt heavier, more patient. She turned onto the familiar road and followed it until the white gate appeared between 2 old stone pillars wrapped in mourning vine. She pressed the intercom. The gate swung open without a word. Grandmother Nkechi's estate was not a place that announced wealth. It had the particular dignity of old money, the kind that doesn't perform, doesn't need to. The house sat at the end of a gravel drive, flanked by trees that had been standing longer than anyone on this earth could account for. Wide porch, copper guttering, a garden so deep and deliberate it looked like it had grown opinions about the people it hosted.
Grandmother Nkechi was at the kitchen table when Adaze walked in. She had a glass of water and a manila folder thick enough to stand on its own. The journal was already between them on the table. She didn't offer pleasantries. She opened the journal. "Your grandfather and I purchased the land under that house on Carmichael Drive 38 years ago," she said. Her voice was the voice of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this conversation. "We placed it in a family trust in your name before you were born. The deed has never been transferred. It has never been sold. It belongs to you." She paused. "Let that land." "The house built on that land was paid for in part with the wedding gift I gave you both, my money, my family's land. Raymond refinanced the property 6 months ago. He forged your signature on the documents. He transferred everything into his name alone." She slid the manila folder across the table. "But a man cannot refinance land he does not own, and he does not own that land. You do. You have always owned it." Adaze looked at the folder. Inside, the original trust deed, a certified land survey, a letter from the family attorney, and copies of the screenshots she had already sent to her grandmother, the group chat, all of it, organized, dated, ready. Grandmother Nkechi folded her hands on the table. "My nanny told me something a long time ago," she said, with eyes that still held limits. "The first time you're not invited to the table, you make a scene. The second time, you make an example." That afternoon, they sat with the family attorney. Documents were reviewed, letters were drafted, a timeline was drawn. Adaze signed everything she needed to sign. She stood when the meeting ended. She walked to the car with the journal under her arm and a stillness in her body that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with readiness. While the legal papers were moving through offices Damon had never heard of, while documents were being dated and stamps were being pressed and a timeline was being quietly assembled, Raymond was getting bold. He brought Zara to Mr. Owusu's neighborhood cookout as if she had always belonged there. She wore a yellow dress and large earrings and moved through the yard with the comfortable ease of a woman who believes the role she's playing has already been confirmed. Pauline arrived 20 minutes later. She walked to the grill, placed one hand on Raymond's shoulder, and turned to the circle of neighbors with the warmth of a woman formally introducing something she had been personally responsible for. "This is Zara, Raymond's new chapter. I hope everyone will make her feel welcome." Nobody cheered. Mrs. Ibarra moved to the other side of the garden. Old Mr. Tago busied himself with the meat. The Nanji children's mother pulled her daughters closer without explanation. And at the edge of the fence, alone, holding a paper plate she hadn't touched, stood Adaze. Still legally his, being socially replaced in front of the same people who had watched her be told she belonged in the garbage. Pauline found her near the fence. She crossed the yard with the precise, measured walk of a woman who has calculated every centimeter of the effect she wants to create. She stopped close enough for the circle of women nearby to hear everything, the kind of private conversation designed to wound publicly. "Sweetheart, I say this kindly. If I were you, I would start packing now. Save yourself the humiliation of being removed twice. The first time was gentle. The second time won't be." The women nearby went quiet. Some looked at their shoes. Some pressed their lips together and turned slightly away. No one said a word in Adaze's defense. Adaze looked at Pauline. Her hand rested on the tote bag at her side, the one with the journal inside it, the one with the attorney's letter pressed flat against the back cover. She said 2 words, quiet, final, "Not yet." Then she set her plate down, picked up her bag, and walked out through the garden gate. A neighbor leaned toward Mrs. Ibarra and whispered, "She's not going to fight. She's already given up." But that neighbor didn't know what was in the tote bag, and she didn't know that the only woman in that yard who knew exactly how this story ended was the one who had just quietly walked away from it.
It was a Saturday.
The same relentless Saturday afternoon sun, the same kind of sky that offers no mercy, no shade, no place to disappear. Adeza was in the bedroom when she heard the first suitcase hit the porch step. She didn't panic. She stood still for a moment in the doorway of the room she had made into a home. The curtains she had chosen, the bedside lamp she had brought from her grandmother's cottage, the potted plant on the windowsill she had nursed back from yellow, and she took a breath. Then she walked downstairs. Raymond was already in the driveway. He had moved fast. 2 suitcases on the ground, garbage bags half-tied, spilling at the corners. A framed photo she'd kept on the hallway wall, face down in the pile. Her shoes, a folded blanket she'd carried into this marriage, an envelope of old letters. Zara sat in the passenger seat of the Range Rover with the door open, one leg crossed over the other. She wasn't pretending to look elsewhere. Pauline came through the front door last, carrying a worn leather tote in her hands, the tote with the journal inside it. She walked to the edge of the pile without looking at Adeza and dropped it on top of the heap. The journal slid halfway out, the cover catching the sun. Then Pauline walked to the Range Rover, turned toward Zara, and smiled with her full face. "Welcome home, sweetheart." Raymond pointed at the pile. He pointed at his wife. His voice carried down the full length of Carmichael Drive. "That's where she belongs." Zara laughed, long, deliberate. The curtains on Carmichael Drive pulled back. Adeza stood at the foot of the driveway and looked at the pile. She looked at Raymond, she looked at Pauline, she looked at Zara in the car. She did not scream, she did not plead, she did not crumble. She bent down, picked up the journal from the dirt, and dusted the cover with the heel of her palm. She tucked it under her arm. She straightened her coat, she adjusted the collar. She let the silence run its full length. And then she smiled. Not a wide smile, not a happy smile, the smile of someone who knows something the rest of the room hasn't figured out yet. Raymond saw the smile. Something cold moved through his chest. Then, at the far end of the street, an engine, low, refined, unhurried. A black Rolls Royce turned the corner. It moved like time itself was accommodating it, like the road had been waiting for it, like everything that had happened on this street today had simply been the prologue. Every face on Carmichael Drive turned. Raymond's eyes moved from the car to Adeza. Her expression had not changed, and for the first time since he dragged that first suitcase out the door, he felt the floor shift under his feet. The car did not speed up, did not slow down. It arrived the way certainty arrives, without apology, without announcement, without any need to explain itself. It pulled to a stop in front of a house. The driver's door opened first. A man in a dark uniform stepped out and moved to the rear. He opened the back door with both hands and stood straight. The street held its breath. First, a pair of shoes, ivory and low-heeled, deliberate. Then the hem of a navy coat, buttoned to the collar. Then hands, steady, unhurried, ringed with a single piece of jewelry that didn't need to be expensive to carry weight. Grandmother Nechi Morrow stepped out of the Rolls Royce. She was 81 years old, and she moved through that street like a woman who had decided long ago that dignity was not a performance, it was simply the only way she knew how to walk. She surveyed the scene without rushing. Her eyes moved from the garbage bags to the suitcases, from the suitcases to Adeze, from Adeze to Raymond, to Pauline, to Zara in the car. She took it all in the way a person takes in a room when they've been given a report and arrived to confirm it with their own eyes. Then she spoke.
Her voice was not raised. It didn't need to be. "Why is my granddaughter standing next to refuse?" Nobody moved. Raymond's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Zara's smile had already begun its retreat. Pauline stood on the steps with her hand on the railing, very still, as though she had just realized something she should have thought about a very long time ago. Grandmother Nikishi turned to her driver. "Pick up her bags." He moved immediately. She walked to where Adeze was standing, placed one hand on her granddaughter's shoulder, and kept it there. One touch, one gesture, and the room understood everything it said. Then she looked at Raymond. Her voice was still even, still quiet. "This street will remember what you did today, and so will every paper with your name on it." She did not yell, she did not explain, she did not list what was coming. She simply turned, walked Adeze toward the car, and before she got in, she stopped. She looked at Pauline for the first time. "You should have left the journal alone." The car door closed, the Rolls Royce pulled away. Carmichael Drive stood in silence for a very long time. Nobody went back inside, nobody spoke. They stood the way people stand when they've just watched something and don't yet know what to do with what they've seen. Raymond watched the taillights disappear around the corner. He looked down at the garbage bags still on the ground, then up at the house, at the curtains Adeze had chosen, at the plant she had placed in the window, and the chill that had started in his chest spread. By evening, the house on Carmichael Drive felt different. Zara sat on the couch with her legs curled under her, scrolling through her phone without looking at the screen. Raymond stood at the kitchen window with a glass of water he hadn't drunk. Pauline sat at the dining table with her hands folded on top of each other, doing the thing she did when she was calculating without wanting anyone to know she was calculating. "Who was that woman?" Zara asked. "Her grandmother," Raymond said. Silence. "Why did she look at you like that?" Zara asked. Raymond didn't answer. Pauline unfolded her hands and refolded them. "It's nothing, old woman with a nice car. It means nothing." But something in the way she said it, the slight oversteadiness of her voice, the small tightening around her jaw, made Raymond look at her more carefully than he had in years. "Mom, what do you know about the land this house is built on?" Pauline looked at him. "What kind of question is that?" Raymond didn't look away. She didn't answer. Quiet things began to happen. A letter arrived from a law firm Raymond had never heard of, return address from the city's east side, where old money kept its offices. He put it in the drawer. He didn't open it that night. 3 days later, the mortgage office called with a question about his refinance documentation, something about a discrepancy in the land title registry. His contact there sounded careful, the particular carefulness of a professional who has found something they weren't expecting and is now choosing their words like a man crossing a rope bridge. Raymond called his solicitor. His solicitor asked for time to look into it. The following morning, a courier attempted delivery. Raymond was out. A notice was left. He still told himself it was manageable. He still told himself he could get ahead of whatever was coming. That was the false confidence of a man who hadn't understood that the thing moving towards him had been moving for much longer than he knew.
Deacon Mensa Ada's annual community appreciation banquet was announced that week. Printed invitations, Greater Hope Fellowship Hall, white tablecloths, the whole neighborhood dressed in their Saturday best, gathered for dinner and recognition. Every person who had stood on Carmichael Drive 8 days ago and watched Adeze Ose be placed beside a trash bin had been invited, and the woman they had watched standing there in silence had accepted. The same community that had witnessed her humiliation was about to sit in the same room as her truth. The same people who had looked away were about to have nowhere left to look. Raymond arrived in a charcoal suit. Zara wore red, the specific red of a woman who wants to be remembered in a room. Pauline was in navy with pearls, moving through the entrance of the fellowship hall like she had co-organized the event. They took their seats near the front. Raymond's hand rested on Zara's chair. Pauline greeted the deacon with a warm handshake. Between the three of them, unspoken, was the shared assumption that everything had already been decided, that whatever moment Adeze had tried to create on that sidewalk with her grandmother's car and her lifted chin, it had passed. She had been removed. The story was over. She arrived alone. A simple cream-colored dress, no jewelry except a thin gold chain, her hair pulled back, a small clutch in one hand and a canvas tote in the other. The tote with the journal inside, flat against a folder of printed documents. She walked through the room and greeted people. She asked Mrs. Ibarra about her garden. She complimented old Mr. Tago on his tie. She shook hands with Deacon Mensa Ada at the door and said something quiet that made him nod seriously. Then she walked to the tech table near the projector screen at the front of the hall. She plugged a laptop into the display port. The screen flickered, went blue, then dark. She made one small adjustment, stepped back and nodded to herself, the nod of someone who has just confirmed that the last piece is in place. Then she returned to her seat. Pauline, across the room, watched all of it. Her fork lowered. Her glass stayed untouched. Her voice, when she leaned toward Raymond, was barely above her breath. Something is wrong. That woman looks too settled for someone who just lost everything. Raymond looked at Adeze, at the tote bag on her chair, at the screen at the front of the room. He didn't reply. Deacon Mensa Ada closed his opening remarks, told the story of his late wife that made half the hall cry and the other half laugh, and then he paused at the podium. He set both hands on the wood. His voice dropped half a register. Before we close this evening, a member of this community has asked to address this room. I have personally reviewed what she has prepared, and I believe, with every part of myself, that every person sitting in this hall tonight needs to hear it. 200 people sat with their dinner plates, thinking they had come for a community banquet. Only one person in the room knew what was loaded on that screen. Adeze stood. The chair didn't scrape. She rose the way still water rises, slowly, without force, without resistance. She picked up her tote, walked to the podium, and set the bag on the edge of the lectern. She faced the room. 8 days ago, she began. Her voice was clear, unhurried, carrying to every corner without being raised. 8 days ago, my husband dragged my belongings to the curb on Carmichael Drive and placed them next to the city trash bin. He looked at me in front of every neighbor on that street and told me and them that that is where I belong. She paused. His girlfriend sat in the car and laughed. His mother walked out of the house carrying my personal belongings and added them to the pile. And then she turned to the girlfriend and said, "Welcome home, sweetheart." The room went still. Not quiet. Still. The kind of silence that presses against the walls.
Adeze reached into the tote. She pulled out a printed stack of pages. She pressed a key on the laptop. The screen at the front of the hall filled. A text message. Raymond's name at the top, Zara's below. The words were large enough for the back row to read. When am I actually moving in, baby? Zara. 2 more weeks. My mom is already handling the paperwork. She'll leave quiet. Raymond. The gasp that moved through the hall was not a single sound. It was a wave, starting from the front rows and rolling backward, row by row, until it reached the doors. Zara's hand went to her purse under the table. Adaze pressed the key again. The group chat filled the screen. 3 names at the top: Raymond, Zara, Pauline. Pauline's message centered in the frame. She came into this marriage with nothing except an old grandmother's name. No real money, no connections, no leverage. She will leave quietly because she has nothing to fight with. Pauline shot to her feet. Her chair flew backward and hit the person behind her. "Turn that off," she hissed. "Turn it off right now." Adaze did not turn, did not pause. She pressed the key again. A mortgage refinance document appeared on the screen. Raymond's name at the top, a signature at the bottom that read Adaze Amara Ose, but the handwriting did not belong to Adaze. She let the room look at it. She let them study the letters. "This is a refinance document my husband filed 6 months ago. He forged my signature and transferred this property entirely into his own name." Raymond pushed back from the table. His chair scraped loudly across the hall floor. That's not what happened." "Sit down," said a voice from the second row. Not aggressive, not raised, the voice of a community elder who has seen enough. Raymond sat. Adaze reached into the tote a final time. She pulled out the journal, the old one, the leather one with the cracked spine, the one Pauline had dropped on the garbage heap 8 days ago like it was worthless. She held it up, and the room recognized it. Some of them had been on Carmichael Drive. Some of them had seen it lying in the dirt next to the bags. "My grandmother gave me this journal on my wedding day. Inside the back cover are 3 documents. The first is an original deed of trust. The second is a certified land survey. The third is a letter from our family attorney confirming that the land, the lot on Carmichael Drive, the ground that house is built on, has been held in a family trust in my name since before I was born." She lowered the journal. She looked at Raymond for the first time since she began speaking. "You stood in that driveway and told me in front of children, in front of elders, in front of every person on that street that I belonged next to refuse. You said it out loud. You made sure everyone heard." A pause. The room leaned forward. "But you have been living on my land, in a house my family's money helped build, with my name underneath every wall, every floor, every room you tried to give away." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You didn't throw away a woman with nothing. You threw away the woman who owned the ground you were standing on." The hall shattered, not with noise, with the particular, devastating silence of 200 people who have just understood something they cannot un-understand. Zara's heel caught the chair leg as she tried to stand. The crack of it traveled through the silence like a signal. She grabbed her bag and moved towards the aisle. And stopped. Mrs. Ibarra was standing in it, not blocking it, just standing, arms folded, looking at Zara with the kind of expression that doesn't require words. Pauline sat back down. Not slowly, she simply dropped, her pearls swinging forward, landing against the tablecloth. She stared at the journal in her daughter-in-law's hands, the same journal she had tossed into the dirt like it was nothing. The side door of the fellowship hall opened. Grandmother and Ketchy Marrow walked through it. She did not hurry. She moved through the hall with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has never once in her life needed to announce her arrival. Her navy coat was buttoned to the collar, one strand of pearls, shoes that clicked against the tile with a quiet, rhythmic authority. She walked to the front of the room. She stood beside Adaeze. She placed one hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. That was all. One gesture, and 200 people understood. This woman has always been here. This family has always known,
and everything that happened on Carmichael Drive 8 days ago was witnessed, documented, and is now being confirmed. She looked at the room. She looked at Raymond. My granddaughter was never standing beside refuse. Her voice was soft. Refuse was standing beside her. The hall breathed out. Some people cried. Some clapped softly, carefully, like they were afraid the sound might crack something fragile. Mrs. Ibarra sat back down and pressed her handkerchief to her eyes. Deacon Mensa Ata returned to the podium. He placed both hands on the wood. He looked at the room for a long moment. "Let us all go home tonight," he said quietly, "and think very carefully about the kind of people we want to be." Zara was already near the door. She would be gone from the city within the week. Raymond sat in his chair with both hands flat on the table, and 200 people's knowledge pressing down on him from every direction. Pauline stared at the journal in Adese's hands, the journal she had thrown away, and understood now, perhaps for the first time, that she had held something priceless and treated it like waste. He found her in the parking lot. She was walking toward Grandmother Nkechi's car, the journal under her arm. "Adeze." She stopped. She didn't turn immediately. "I made a mistake. I know that. I know what I did. But I was confused. I let my mother and Zara get inside my head. And I know that's not an excuse, but we can talk about this. We can figure this out. You're still my wife." He took a step closer. His voice was low, nearly private, the voice of a man performing sincerity because he has nothing else left to perform. "Please, I'm asking you. I'm begging you." Adese turned. She looked at him the way a woman looks at someone she has finished grieving, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with the particular clarity of someone who is already moved to the other side of something. "You didn't lose me when my grandmother stepped out of that car." Her voice was even, unhurried, final. "You lost me the morning I saw those messages on your phone and put it back exactly where you left it. You lost me the afternoon your mother told a yard of neighbors that I had nothing, and you nodded. You lost me every time you chose comfort over truth." She paused. "A man who places a woman next to trash has already decided what she's worth to him. He doesn't get to recalculate when the account turns out to be larger than he thought." She walked to the car. She didn't look back.
Zara was gone from the city before the eviction notice was formally delivered. Not because she was ashamed, though perhaps that came later. She left because the thing she had been pursuing was no longer there. The house, the status, the man who had seemed briefly like an escalator to somewhere higher. When the screen at the fellowship hall had shown those messages in letters large enough for the back row to read, something in the architecture of what she had been building collapsed, not dramatically, but completely. Raymond called her number twice. The first time, it rang 6 times and went to voicemail. The second time, the number was disconnected. Her parking space at the apartment building down the road was empty by Tuesday, blinds drawn, mailbox overflowing. She had vanished the way people vanish when the thing they were chasing turns out to have been sitting on someone else's foundation all along. 3 months later. The light at Grandmother Nkechi's estate in the late afternoon is a specific gold, the kind that falls slowly and doesn't rush any of the things it touches. Adeze sat on the porch of the cottage at the far end of the property, a small place with a tin roof and white-painted boards and a vegetable garden along the side that she had planted herself, tomatoes, basil, dark-leaved greens pushing up through the soil like small green declarations. Wind chimes hung from the eave,
A glass of tea sat cooling on the armrest. The journal was open on the small table beside her. Not to the back pages with the legal documents, not to the evidence, to the middle. Her own handwriting, small entries, true things. The record of a woman returning to herself. Grandmother Nikichi came through the screen door with a second glass and settled into the chair beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while. The wind chimes turned once and went still. A bird landed on the garden fence and tilted its head. You didn't need the land, baby. You didn't even need the money. You just needed to remember who you were before he convinced you to forget. Adaze looked at her grandmother, and she smiled. Not a careful smile, not the small knowing one from the sidewalk, a real one, the kind that starts behind the eyes. The journal lay open in the afternoon light. The garden grew, and on a porch she had earned with patience and truth and the refusal to become the kind of person who had hurt her. Adaze Morrow breathed the kind of air that only reaches you after you have walked through every room that tried to make you small. She never screamed, she never begged, she never fought for what was already hers. She just waited, quietly, steadily, until the truth had no more room to hide. Tell me something honestly in the comments. What hurt more? The husband calling her trash in front of the whole street, or the neighbors who watched in silence and said nothing? Because sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from the people who hurt you. It comes from the people who stood close enough to speak and chose not to. Drop your answer below. And if this story reminded you that dignity is its own kind of power, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight.